Alright, and we are back. I needed a break really, really badly after that Mudsdale review. As in, like, that card is so awful. I could go on and on and on, but let's get down to business. So, anyways, when we left off, we were at Passimian. So, Passimian's got 110 HP, decent, but about the same as the Team Play one from Sun and Moon. The punch attack doesn't really do that much. Team plays better. Intentional grounding, that seems like it could be a pretty decent standalone attack if you played it outside of a Passimian dedicated deck and maybe as like a tech attacker. But in Passimian, I don't really think that this really makes sense. I don't think that you'd want to run a one of. I think you always run the team play one. But if you need some sort of splashable fighting attacker that's relatively cheap and non EX, then this is an option. So I would say, though, that Marshadow GX is probably one of the most important cards in this entire set. And the reason why is because of Shadow Hunt. Now, whenever a card like this comes out, I think it's really, really important to think about all of the different possibilities that it has. These are cards that I like to call infinite possibility cards. So, for example, Mew EX from Legend Maker, and then later on from Dragon's Exalted, and then reprinted over and over again. That's an infinite potential card because of its ability. And the same applies for Shadow Hunt, because by being able to copy any basic Pokemon's attack in the discard pile, that opens up for a slew of possibilities because there are an infinite number of basic Pokemon, theoretically. So it would follow then that by having an infinite number of basic Pokemon, then the ability has an infinite number of attacks. Theoretically, anyways. But even though that's theoretical and not practical, we still have a lot of different possibilities. Now, I've only begun to actually think about what this card can do. I think that there are certainly some possibilities with cards that involve coin flips. And the reason why is because you take a look, a lot of these cards by themselves are nothing special. They can kind of have cute combinations with the Victory Star Victini, but when you begin to combine them in a way, and you combine them in a card like Marshadow, then you suddenly get a lot of potential. So let's go ahead and think of, for example, Pinsir from the Next Destiny set. So nothing special, just flip 2 coins, discard energy for each heads. And then we also think of a card like Alolan Sandshrew from the last set, which has a free attack, and if you flip a coin and if heads, you prevent all effects of attacks, or I think it might be a damage, but either way, you see my point. So you find a way to combine and unite all these different attacks that involve coin flips, and you could attach to Marshadow for a coin flip deck. That's only one possibility. Another way you could take this card is you could treat it as just a really aggressive secondary attacker in a fighting deck. So let's take a look at Zygarde EX Carbink Break. Okay, so Zygarde, Carbink, its good matchups are really good. Its bad matchups are horrible. I think you could add Marshadow into that deck, and then you'd suddenly open up for a lot of possibilities, because let's think about it. So Zygarde EX, Carbink Break, and what's one way around some of that stuff? Marshadow GX. So some of the things that might be hard on EX Pokemon, not so much on GX, and vice versa. So that's one way you could use it, and it could effectively just be another Zygarde for all you wanted with the Shadow Hunt. The beatdown attack is actually pretty decent considering that you have so many different possibilities with Shadow Hunt. And then the GX attack is okay. I think it really depends on what direction you want to take it, though. Where theoretically the attack is okay, but I think the best ways to abuse Marshadow, and this is some good card analysis and good designing by the Pokemon card creators, is to make a card that really exploits Rainbow Energy, exploits WLFM, the Blend Energy, and exploits Strong Energy, but make a GX attack that doesn't let you exploit either of those. So I think that its possibilities are basically endless. I mean, if you have Strong Energy in Expanded, what becomes better when you use an attack with Strong Energy that you wouldn't be able to use otherwise? I can think of Quaking Punch. I mean, that's a possibility. I can think of. Let's see some of the other top tier basic attacks. I mean, like Evil Ball. That would be pretty neat. Evil Ball with strong energy. What else? I mean, like, and then kind of the same thing applies to expanded the same way that it does to standard, where you've got basically all sorts of different possibilities, and you could take it in the direction of a more aggressive strong energy build, or you could take it in a rainbow energy build. Although right now I'm thinking you might even be able to run a deck that abuses both, and that's easier said than done, because I think that strong energy based decks generally do a little bit better when they are more aggressive. They don't play as many of the little control deck tricks that a rainbow energy list would, but theoretically you could combine the two. Now, I mean, my old friend Vileplume from Ancient Origins is also a possibility, where instead of like a gimmicky coin flip deck, you could play Marshadow with Vileplume and then a whole bunch of different painful disruption cards. Like, I mean, let's double check the text of the card. It says basic Pokemon, not just any Pokemon, but it can be any type of basic Pokemon. So one way we could abuse that is we could run a whole bunch of energy discard, and then an energy discarding attack, and then a luring attack. And then to top it all off, we could run Tapu Fini GX for its GX attack that we were talking about in the last part of the video. So combine all of that, and you create a whole other brand new deck. So tons of possibilities. I cannot go on longer about this because we have more cards to get to, but trust me, there are tons of possibilities. I mean, even at like the pre-release level, you will be able to see all sorts of crazy things with this card, let alone actual constructed play like standard and expanded. I think kind of in the same line with a couple of the other below the radar cards like Salazzle GX, and maybe to a lesser extent like something weird like Machamp GX, excuse me. This could be the best sleeper opportunity out of anything in the set, so keep an eye on it. And let's see, we got the Alolan Raticate line. Same gimmick, a free attack on an Alolan Pokemon. Not that good on the Rattata. And this does more damage if you have a tool on it. I'm not sure what kind of a tool you'd want to use. Maybe one possibility is you could play like Bursting Balloon on the active Pokemon and the active Alolan Raticate. Attack with it for free, charge something up on the bench, and maybe just take the 60. Then we've got the Alolan Muk family. We've got Alolan Grimer. I think that this Alolan Grimer put in a vacuum is better than the one in Sun and Moon, because even though Poison can be pretty good, I think that searching out your deck for Alolan Grimer is better, because you want to be able to fill your bench on turn one if you can, if you don't have anything better to do when going second. Normally that would mean you have a pretty bad hand, but I think that push come to shove, I'd rather be able to use Division than I would really care about like Poison, because we have tons of Poison opportunities with Muk GX. So this has been kind of a theme, a recurring theme we've seen with attacks over the past few years. There is an occasional gimmick attack that gives you more damage for more special conditions that you have on your opponent's active Pokemon, that obviously combos with things like Ariados, meaning that there might be a late game sleeper opportunity at Worlds, perhaps with like a weird, crazy Alolan Muk and Ariados and Salazzle deck. Then there is the Crunch attack, which is just a pretty bland 120 for 4. I think if you get in the right board position, this can be pretty good. So by that I mean, if you are disrupting your opponent, if you're getting way ahead, then this can actually be good to maybe close a game, where if your opponent's mounting a comeback, you can play Guzma, bring up their Pokemon with the energy on it, and then just start crunching and trying to get rid of it as soon as you can. So it's definitely a win more attack for sure. And last of all, we got the, at least to my knowledge, the only free GX attack in the game right now, Tri-Hazard GX. So it's basically a lure, and you get 3 status conditions: Poison, Burn, Paralyzed. all those great conditions, all those would normally be great, but we've got a very important card in the form of Guzma. We've been talking about it over and over again. I'm almost beginning to doubt a little bit the wisdom of starting with something other than Guzma and the trainers, but that's okay. You'll hear plenty about it soon. But I think that something that disrupts this is just bad. And so because of that, unless you're in a really desperate situation, this attack is probably bad. Now, maybe some exceptions are, like we were talking about earlier, Vileplume decks. So that's a little bit of a niche, and that really only has a limited shelf life in the current 16-17 format, but maybe it's something to consider for expanded. All in all, I think it's definitely an improvement. I think that it is doing a lot more justice to the Alolan Muk line. And speaking of which, you've got access to that. Don't forget that. You have the ability to play and mix and match the two different Alolan Muks and Alolan Grimers in case you want to avoid a certain weakness, for example. Like, the Psychic weakness on Alolan Grimer from Sun and Moon is really bad because of Gardevoir. Alolan Grimer's weakness here in Burning Shadows can be pretty bad because of certain fighting decks. But you could have a good balance between the two and you'd probably be okay. And of course you can always run up to 4 of these if you want to, but you can also run maybe a tech copy of the Alolan Muk from Sun and Moon to shut off abilities. That can be really big, especially if you do a turn 1 Wally at the beginning of the game. Meaning that effectively you could shut off your opponent and close out the game. So we got the Weevil family, and this is a pretty nifty attack. Dark Awakening dealing 60 to everything with an ability. Now, years and years ago, there was actually a Pichu card that effectively did the same thing. And it was pretty decent. It was played in a lot of decks because abilities, or back then as they were called, Pokemon powers, were really popular. But the difference is that thing, despite being a 30 HP baby, was a tank because it had all sorts of ways to stay alive. Weavile, on the other hand, does not have those abilities. And Power Creep has led us to a spot where dealing 60 to everything with an ability in play, while pretty good, is probably, in most situations, not enough to justify running this card. So, let's think of some exceptions. Well, unfortunately, I don't think that Garbodor or Gardevoir have any problems with this card at all. I don't think it'll help in those matchups. I think it could be very good against a Decidueye deck because you're getting multiple abilities into play. I mean, just imagine that for a second. Like, let's take Decidueye Vileplume. On average, you're probably going to have at least about 4 or 5 abilities in play in the late game. We've got 2 Decidueye, we've got a Vileplume, and then we have 1 to 2 different stragglers like a Shaman or a Tapu Lele we use to set up. So Dark Awakening can be incredible against all of that. You could possibly win a game outright by using Dark Awakening, followed by Espeon EX's Miraculous Shine, so it's worth putting in your back pocket. Now, unfortunately, I don't even think this card is enough to win that matchup for decks, mainly because it's got really low HP. I mean, this is what we were talking about at the beginning. Pichu, despite having 30 HP, was a tank because it had access to a tool that let you protect itself on a coin flip. We can get into that later, maybe someday with an old format discussion. And it had its own special baby ability that made all attacks and all effects of attacks a tails fail situation. So you were in a spot where 1 out of 4 attacks was knocking out the baby, but 3 out of 4, if not failing outright, weren't dealing enough damage to kill it. So Weavile, too low HP, too brittle to handle anything. And now we've got Darkrai, basic Darkrai. I think that this is actually, no pun intended, because it's the whole gimmick of Darkrai, but it is a sleeper hit because Dark Raid, if you've already used your GX attack, it does OHKO one-shot range damage. And so what that means is if your opponent, has used their GX attack, then all those Tapu Leles they have in play are suddenly in range. So I think that in the right deck, this could offer a huge deterrent to your opponent from actually using any type of GX attack. I'm thinking about situations where opponents would want to use their GX attack early, like say Big Wheel GX on Drampa GX, Hollow Hunt GX on Decidueye GX. Situations like that, I think that the later in the game it goes, that is a GX attack, the less impactful this can be. But I think at the same time that if you have some sort of deterrent to using the early game GX attacks, there's a pretty inherently nice balance to it. Now, 3 energy is still a lot, but if you have some way to get it into play, I mean, I can think of Expanded for sure with Dark Patch, then it's really not that big of a deal. So speaking of Dark Patch, we've got one of the most hyped cards out of the set. We got Darkrai GX, and everybody knows this. I'm assuming most of you already know, at least to a certain extent, what this ability does. Being able to play this from your bench and attach a free energy is nuts. It is crazy, where effectively by discarding this thing, you get free damage output and you get a faster attacker. So I can tell you right off the bat, this thing isn't nearly as good in Standard as good as it is in Expanded. Of course, I think everything we can all agree on is better in Expanded than it is in Standard. I mean, we don't have access to Battle Compressor, we don't have access to Dark Patch and things like that, so it isn't quite what it is, but even just in the natural flow of a Standard format game, it's actually pretty easy to discard a Darkrai GX. So, let's talk a little bit about a sleeper deck at the North American International Championships that really didn't perform the way people expected it to, which was Darkrai EX from Breakpoint with Garbodor Garbotoxin, not the Trash Avalanche Garbodor. So the idea there was you were shutting off abilities, you were trying to hedge against your worst matchups, but you were also going the classic Turbo Darkrai strategy. Well, I think whatever that deck was lacking may have a little bit of help with Darkrai GX. You don't even need a whole lot of these. Maybe you could run like 2. Only reason you'd want to run 2 is so that you wouldn't have one in the prizes, but theoretically the idea is actually pretty simple, because you find some way to either start with a Darkrai GX in your hand, or you search out with like an Ultra Ball or something for a Darkrai GX, put it in your hand, discard it with Sycamore or whatever, and point is, you're getting Dark into the discard, you're getting Darkrai GX into the discard, and you're dealing faster damage. So the potential of Dark Pulse Darkrai EX is suddenly a lot more thanks to this thing in every format. But I think that whatever the Standard version was lacking now has a lot more potential. So looking at the 2 attacks on Darkrai GX, we don't see anything special on Dark Rift. I mean, that's a decent hitting attack, but it isn't anything to write home about. And then the GX attack, Dead End GX, if there's a special condition, it's knocked out. Now, this kind of reminds me of Darkrai EX, because it has a second attack that heavily depends on status conditions also. In that case, it was Sleep on the defending Pokemon. This depends on any status effect, which is pretty cool, meaning there are more ways to combo it, but it's a little bit harder to finagle, because unlike that, where it only costs 2 colorless and a dark, meaning that it's accessible by a dark and a double, this doesn't let you do that because of the 2 dark and the colorless. Now, the Resurrection ability helps. I think it puts things in range, but it seems to me like in Standard, at least, you would have to dedicate quite a few more spaces just to make this thing work. And even then, if you did want to make Dead GX work, then you'd only get to use it once a game. So, I mean, let's think of status effects. We got Salazzle, we've got Ariados, all the same things that combo potentially with Alolan Muk GX. Those things are actually pretty decent, so maybe one possibility is you could run an Alolan Muk, Darkrai, and status condition. So the idea there is you can either lead with the Darkrai, knock out something with Dead End GX, or you can lead with Alolan Muk and then close out the game with Dead End GX. So 1 or 2 different possibilities. Definitely a lot of potential in every format, but I can't help but think maybe there's a little bit more opportunity. Of course, it is busted and expanded with Darkrai EX available, both Darkrai EXs and Dark Patch and Battle Compressor. It's crazy. Although on the other hand, like we talked about earlier, everything's more broken and expanded, so don't think of it to be too much right now. I mean, let's not assume that it's going to be the overall best deck in the format for expanded. So let's just play it by ear for now. And we got the Malamar family. It's pretty mediocre for sure. If you guys, although this reminds me, if you guys are actually like remotely interested in a goofy thing to play for Worlds or the Anaheim Open, there is a Malamar from Ancient Origins that has a lot more potential than this card. Lets you search out cards from your discard, lets you lure things up and confuse them. It's actually really cool. I don't know how viable it is, but it's definitely better than this thing. And now I need to take a sip of water because we are about to get to the biggest part of the whole video. Even if my analysis doesn't live up to it, it is definitely the biggest part of the video because we are talking about Gardevoir GX. This is the card that won the Japanese National Championship. This is the card that's getting all the hype, and I would not be surprised if this is the card that gets played the most at Anaheim Open and at Worlds. Reason being is because I remembered everybody talking about Mega Mewtwo EX when it came out, how good it is. It was held down by Night March. And then when Night March effectively rotated, Mega Mewtwo became really good and really successful. And then Garbodor Trashalanche came out and made it unplayable. Well, now we've got an effective reprint of Infinite Force from Mega Mewtwo Psy Infinity on Infinite Force, which is effectively the same attack, and arguably better because it only costs 1 energy. And on top of that, being able to energize your Pokemon, meaning that if you get multiple Gardevoir GX into play, you're swarming for a lot of damage, you're hitting really hard, you can max potion stuff away, you can all in all be just a massive threat on the board with little investment. And if that wasn't good enough, they throw on a relatively busted GX attack that effectively says, shuffle your discard back into your deck. Now, I don't literally mean that when you have more than 10 cards in your discard pile, but I figuratively mean it because most people are running enough options to the point where they probably could do that. So I think this is especially applicable to the Worlds format and expanded because VS Seeker will be legal in both of those. So an incredible late game play people can make with Twilight GX is, hey, you've played like 3 or 4 VS Seeker, so why not shuffle in the VS Seeker? And whatever consistency cards you may need, and maybe like a Lysander or a Guzma, and then maybe like a Max Potion, and then, well, you get the drift. So clearly it's a really good deck in Standard. It's already proven to a certain extent in the XY On format because winning Japanese Nationals is actually a pretty hard thing by all accounts. Winning any Nationals is really hard, but I think especially theirs would qualify. I would say they converted over to the Primal Clash format. It's probably just as good of a deck, if not better, because there aren't nearly as many things that can outspeed it, where Battle Compressor doesn't let you bleed through your deck or anything like that. Night March doesn't exist. That said, Forest of Giant Plants is legal in both, so I think that forest-based decks definitely have some potential to keep up with this thing. I really wonder if this can't keep up with Vespiquen, because let's just break it down a little bit, because the Vespiquen doesn't take too much to get up to that 230 now thanks to Choice Band, and meanwhile this may take about 2, maybe even 3 to 4 turns to set up everything completely, but I think that by a knockout or 2 from the Gardevoir, Vespiquen might be able to make a comeback win. So Gardevoir's presence in the metagame, like Decidueye and like Garbodor before it, warps the metagame. I think it warps the format. And so everything is going to be factoring in this deck. Everything is going to be trying to metagame it. And as a result, you'll probably be seeing a lot of creative, goofy things leading up to Worlds. Like random metal Pokemon in decks. You might see Espeon EXs in decks that don't need it. You might see Espeon EXs in decks you do need it, and then conversely you might be seeing some counter metagaming from Gardevoir players trying to play around that stuff, but considering how many people I expect to use this deck, it might not be very smart to do that, but to maybe even play for the mirror match, because playing the matchups out in my head right now, it seems like this probably does incredibly well against Gardevoir. There's a reason why you didn't see any Gardevoir at the top of the Masters Division of the Japanese National Championships. This will probably do incredibly well against other decks, definitely random decks. It seems like it might struggle a little bit, the Volcanion. I think Volcanion will go a pretty even game with it, and I think the Decidueye decks will go a pretty even game with it too. But I would expect this to be the top deck going into Worlds, and I'd expect it to be the most... you know, let's rewind a little bit. By top deck, I don't necessarily mean the best deck, and I definitely don't mean the best deck for you. But what I do mean is it is the most popular deck. It is the most played deck. And considering how much variety there's been in this season, I think that says something for sure. So, part of what really helps this deck out is Diancie with Sparkling Wish. And just for the record, I am so happy this card exists not just for fairy decks, but for everything. Because we have needed some sort of really reliable way to search out and directly evolve Pokemon quickly. And there just hasn't been anything like that for a really long time. I think that the last time there was a card like this was several years ago. And now that evolutions are popular, I think the game creators thought, hey, this is probably a good idea. Let's effectively reprint it. And to make things even better, it's searchable by level ball, so and expanded in Worlds, that's an option in case you want to do that. You can always play it with Rainbow Energy if you want to use it in a deck using Rainbows. I think there are just an incredible amount of ways to play this thing, but maybe the simplest ways are the best, because if you run Diancie with Gardevoir GX, then you have not only a way to get out your Gardevoir Swarm easily, but you have a non-EX Pokemon, non-GX Pokemon to get knocked out, putting your opponent on an odd prize exchange. So we are back to some worse fairy cards, the Ribombee line. And this actually is a lot better than the last one was, for sure. I mean, the last one just heals 20 if you put it into play, which has never really been that good of an ability. This, on the other hand, is actually kind of cool. I don't know if it's worth the bench space or the investment in a Gardevoir GX deck. I think maybe a 1/1 line, maybe, but even then it's probably not worth it at all, as opposed to like Professor's Letters or just guaranteed ways to search out energy. So maybe, I mean, like, think about it, but I don't really know. And I also don't like the idea of running another non-EX card like that when Diancie's your non-EX prize exchange. We've got Shiinotic. And this is kind of awkward, so it deals 30 and heals a whole bunch of damage for all the energy on your on your opponent's active Pokemon. Downside, it's got really low HP. And on top of that, if they got lots of energy on them, that means that Shiinotic is probably not going to be hanging around for that long. Probably a bad card. Probably never going to see play. Except maybe in the pre-release, so hope you pull some. We've got Noivern GX, and I'm sure you guys have been reading lots of hype about this. This is going to exploit the little window of time that there is in Standard where Double Dragon is legal at the same time, but you theoretically have a possibility of getting a turn 1 Quaking Punch in the current format, but realistically more of a chance of getting a turn 2 one unless you go second and Wally. But it's got a little bit more bulk than Seismitoad EX and from Furious Fist, so that's something to go with it. And we've got the effective reprint of the Giratina EX attack, not nearly as good as Chaos Wheel, but it is especially cool to be able to switch between the two of them. So if you're in certain matchups where the item lock really isn't nearly as important, if they've wiggled out of it, then you can just go into Special Energy Lock. And we've got Boom Burst GX. I don't really think it's that good of an attack. I mean, unless you're running like a weird Noivern GX Decidueye GX deck, I see no real value for that in standard or expanded. I mean, maybe I'm being a little close-minded here, but when you're dealing 50s, like 50 just isn't what it used to be. Like most basic Pokemon, like non-EX, non-GX basic Pokemon, aren't even 50 HP. Now combine it with something that could abuse that, like, I don't know, Darkrai GX and Feather Arrow, and then maybe we're on to something, but by itself it's not really that incredible. Although, I can't help but think about what potential might have in expanded. And I've got multiple reasons for thinking that. So the first one is, it's sure, like, there maybe better options in expanded. Like, you could effectively have this whole deck if you ran Mew EX and Seismitoad Giratina and ran like Psychic and Grass or something weird like that. But I mean, maybe it could fill a little bit of a niche. Overall, it's probably not as good as an expanded. The fairy weakness definitely hurts in standard. Like, I think that even with weakness policy, it's probably not that great. But it could definitely be okay in standard, and especially with the free retreats. So as long as you have some sort of really reliable way to deal with Gardevoir GX, it could be a pretty decent card. Although, I mean, thinking about it a little bit more, how good are its matchups? Like, I mean, maybe it would have a good Gardevoir matchup, but it'd have a rough Decidueye matchup. It would have a bad Volcanion matchup, especially if people were running lists with a lot of fire energy over like energy retrieval or something like that. So maybe there's a really good reason why this card just isn't that popular in Japan, and why it might not be that popular at Worlds. It could be the next Sylveon GX in the sense that it gets lots of hype, but when push comes to shove and people are choosing what cards they have to sleeve up, they won't pick it. And here we are to a pretty intriguing, massive non-EX Pokemon with decent damage output. We got Zygarde. This is another card that may abuse a small window of time for double dragon energy, and this is actually kind of neat because you could run this thing with Reshiram from Morning Skies, and so the gimmick would be you would charge up your dragon Pokemon with Reshiram with fire energy, and then you would play the double dragon to knock things out. So it'd be a big basic deck. It would be a turbo big basic deck, and you could very easily get up to 100 to Tapu Lele damage knockout with Core Enforcer with a Choice Band. So this is kind of falling in the same line of some things like Gyarados, like Golisopod GX, and that if you were to run this card as the core of its own deck, it would effectively be pigeonholed into killing Tapu Lele. So then the question's raised, well, what do you do after that? What could you possibly do to follow up with that? Well, I mean, you could run another dragon Pokemon with it. You could run a harder hitting dragon Pokemon, like, I don't know, maybe the Dragon Rayquaza, the Dragon Mega Rayquaza from Roaring Skies. So, I mean, I can imagine some situations where you're starting the early game out, where you're core enforcering over and over again. You're trying to load up on your Zygarde, swarm with them, and then you close out the late game with Dragon Mega Rayquaza. So, food for thought. And we've got the Persian line. During your next turn, 60 more from attacks. Basically, I mean, this is virtually an unplayable card with Guzma. I can't even imagine anything that would really exploit that too well. Got the Porygon Z line. You know what? I don't think it really applies to these Porygons, but generally I think it's historically a really good idea, even with Porygon Z as the final stage in the evolution, to look at the whole Porygon line. Because historically, there have been Porygons or Porygon 2s that have been released that were better than the Porygon Z. Like, in Great Encounters, there's an incredibly playable Porygon 2, and even in the video games you kind of see that happen, where Porygon 2's almost as good as Porygon Z. But here, the only one we want to consider playing as maybe Porygon Z as a main card for any purpose. So effectively, it's got Espeon EX's attack as its ability. I mean, that's a lot of card investment, don't you think? Like, a lot of card investment just to do the same thing. Could be good. I think it especially could be good next format when people are rare candying a lot. But for now, I don't think it has as much of a home. So, then we've got the Noctowl line. No, that's awful. Then Bouffalant, not really nearly as good as some of the other Bouffalants in the past, unfortunately. We've got the Beware family. Kind of a gimmicky attack. I'm not really that impressed, although maybe with the draw ability Beware from the last set, you could run this Stuffle as like your basic. Or if you're running some sort of gimmicky Beware GX attack deck, you can run that as a basic. Who knows? And now let's get to Acerola, what I consider one of the best supporters out of the new set. We are putting Pokemon with damage counters into your hand, not discarding anything, not like AZ, effectively better than AZ. The only condition is you have to have damage counters on it. So there are multiple ways we can go about that. The first and perhaps easiest way, simple, super simple in fact, just get hit. Get hit by your opponent. Don't even worry about playing anything to put damage on you. This is kind of the same theory behind, say, running like no Magma base in Darkrai GX Gardevoir, because you can count on either playing something else to get around it or getting hit. Well, that's the idea that we could have here. The second, and maybe more proactive way to do that, would be to run Rainbow Energy. So you run Rainbow Energy, use whatever attack you're doing whatever thing you're doing, and then the next turn, regardless of whether or not you get hit, you have the access to Acerola. So in that sense, you can also play Acerola in a Decidueye deck, so even if you don't have any other reason to play it, you can evolve up to a Decidueye, evolve up to another Decidueye, attach a Rainbow Energy to your active, Acerola, evolve it up again with a Forest in play. That's really good for Expanded. That's really good for the Worlds format. Those are definitely worth keeping an eye on. Now, Acerola's applicability in every deck is really not quite the same. I think that there are definitely some decks that can exploit it the most. I think like I was suggesting, really comes down to Decidueye. I think that Decidueye interacts with this card more than just about any other thing, and the reason why is because, like I explained earlier, it exploits it really well, but at the same time, decks that run Acerola are effectively countering Decidueye, because anything that gets Feather Arrow targeted can be brought back to the hand. So not necessarily a good situation if you want to try to close out a game where, say, you are Feather Arrowing and Tapu Lele, they trigger Acerola, they bring the Lele back to the hand, and then they dig out of whatever bad situation they're in with Tapu Lele, and then you're just like, what am I going to do now? So it's a little harder to deal with Decidueye, but I think it can be a pretty influential card in those matchups for sure, in either direction. And then another way you can go about it is just run Team Magma Secret Base, or any stadium, as a matter of fact, that puts damage counters on your own Pokemon. Or, conversely, you can exploit stadiums of your own opponent putting counters onto your Pokemon, and then you can reuse stuff. So lots of different ways to go about it, even in Standard, even at Worlds, even in the next format. So is this card a definite one of? I don't really know. I can't say for sure, but considering how two-shot oriented this format's been for the most part, how attrition-based this format has been, I think this card can be pretty good, and it can be incredible in a tank deck. Bodybuilding dumbbells, and really all it is it's just more HP for stage 1s. I mean, I think we're going to be losing a lot of Stage 1 support when we miss out on the Evolution family from Ancient Origins. Those guys with the Flare effect, the Lightning effect, the Aqua effect, the ability changing only for Stage 1s. So that's really kind of a shame. This gives it a little bit more opportunity for Worlds and Expanded, but the question I ask myself is, what are we really getting out of that extra HP? Well, in certain matchups, I think it actually could be pretty helpful for Gardevoir, for example, because a lot of cards right now, you've been looking through them, are designed in a way that they're dealing exactly 120 damage. Well, play attack bodybuilding dumbbells onto, say, your Trash Avalanche Gardevoir, and suddenly it's a lot harder to knock it out. And then another thing you could do is you could play the bodybuilding dumbbells on the Garbotoxin Gardevoir, and suddenly it's a lot harder to just kill it, because all the decks that have bad matchups to it are going to struggle to get the bodybuilding dumbbells off. Now, I don't really think that this card's terribly influential. I don't think it will be terribly influential, and the reason why is actually really simple. Because, generally speaking, tools that are more reactive aren't nearly as good as tools that are proactive. And by tools that are proactive, I mean tools that are adding damage to your attacks, tools that are doing things. Tools that are just sitting there and really aren't deterring your opponent that much, not that good. I think a good exception would be Bursting Balloon. Bursting Balloon, because it's effectively such a big deterrent and so strong a reaction from your opponent that you're essentially afraid to attack. I think that's a lot stronger than something like, oh, this gets more HP, because, I mean, at that point, all your opponent has to do is figure out ways to either get rid of the bodybuilding dumbbells or to, in the alternative, deal more damage. I mean, it's not that hard. And then Escape Rope, we are pleasantly surprised to see a reprint of it so soon. We have... Oh, okay. Yeah, you know, I've been talking about this so much, I might as well focus on it really hard. So, let's talk about Guzma. Guzma, we all know about Lysander and how important Lysander is. Well, that card is suddenly not important. Relatively not important. So, we are getting the effect not only of Lysander, but we are getting the effect of switching. And so, in my opinion, this is a little unfair. It's a little loaded, because effectively you're getting to choose two things and your opponent is not, where you're getting two advantages that you would have gotten otherwise from other cards. And in addition to that, we've been talking a lot about status effects. I think status effect decks are definitely given the short end of the stick by Guzma, and that's doubly so when you consider that I think people are probably going to trend towards playing more Guzma in decks than Lysander in this little window of time they have to do it. Reason why people have been talking a lot about, oh, well, maybe I should run one Lysander and one Guzma, you know, to keep it even. Well, I mean, Guzma's just a better card. Like, literally, and this is actually kind of important. I'm not 100% sure on the ruling here. It says, if you switch your opponent's active Pokemon, switch your active Pokemon. That reads conditional to me. That makes me think that this card can't be played at all if your opponent doesn't have a bench, which in that case would make it marginally worse than Olympia, but only in that one situation. I think this card overall, in all formats, it for the most part outclasses Olympia, definitely outclasses Lysander. It will be a staple card in every deck in the 2017-2018 format for sure. And the quantity might go up pretty high. It might not even be like 1 or 2. It might be 3 because we're losing VS Seeker. But I think the people who are running more Guzma are probably going to benefit from that at Worlds for sure, because it's just such a good card. Like, it's almost 100% better than Lysander. Almost 100%. But with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at another really incredible card. We've got Kiawe, which effectively lets you load up one of your Pokemon with fire energy, end your turn, boom. That is busted. And it's doubly busted because we have so many ways to search out supporters. We've got Tapu Lele in standard, we've got Tapu Lele and Jirachi in expanded, and we've got Battle Compressor and BS Seeker in expanded as well. So there are so many different ways we can guarantee the 4 energy on the first turn. No guarantee that the Pokemon will live, because it is a sitting duck with all that energy. Because if you have some sort of, say, I don't know, an attack with infinite damage potential, maybe something with a lot of force, maybe I guess maybe you could call it like infinite force. Yeah, that sounds like a good attack name. Yeah. But hypothetically, if there was something that had infinite force, then maybe whatever just got all that fire energy will get knocked out really quickly. So definitely a great card, but it's not 100% unbalanced. There are ways around it, and I think that players will find that to be the case. And on top of it, you're ending your turn. But when you're going first, I think that this gives all fire decks, and especially Volcanion, a much better opening turn going first, for sure. In expanded, I don't think the potential is that much more than in standard, either standard, but I would definitely say that it's worth keeping an eye out on both formats for sure. And in Lana, we're basically healing a bunch of damage to Pokemon with water energy. It doesn't have to be water Pokemon, it can be Pokemon with Rainbow on them, Pokemon with WLFM, so the potential is pretty up there. It's pretty up there and expanded in the right deck, but I think that you have to time it just right. Like, you'd have to be in a situation where you're desperately needing to heal everything. I mean, I can think of maybe like some bad spots against Flying Flip from Tapu Koko, the promo from the previous few, not any of the previous sets, but a couple of the box sets that came out. I think that'd be a great situation to have a Lana in. Of course, the condition is you'd have to have all Pokemon with water energy, so that's a little hard to deal with. I personally prefer Pokemon Center Lady in most decks over Lana, even if you had water energy or rainbow energy, just because it isn't quite as helpful. And it's very conditional. So we got Mount Lanakila adding more retreat, and that makes me really excited for my Piloswine deck. My awful Piloswine deck. But for the most part, Team Aqua's Secret Base has just been better because it brings down the retreat on everything, not just basic Pokemon, but Team Aqua Pokemon. So for the most part, I would fully anticipate Team Aqua's Secret Base to be a better choice in both of Worlds and in Expanded. But maybe this might fit a little bit of a niche in decks that just don't want to run any other stadiums. We got Olivia, which just lets you search out Pokemon GX. Now, unfortunately, because the whole gimmick on Wonder Tag is being able to search out a supporter, I don't think this card as a consistency supporter is nearly as influential as it could be otherwise. Because unlike formats or situations and supporters where you can search out Shaman EX and continue your turn, that really isn't quite the case here. I think that there are a lot of better card options, even for the current format. Like, Pokemon Fan Club could be a better option. I think that maybe, well, not Bridget, because it doesn't go into your hand, it goes into play, but I think perhaps the best niche opportunity is if you're having a lot of trouble finding your Pokemon GX that are evolved for whatever reason. So maybe you could run like a Tekka copy and let that search out your evolved GX for one turn, search out a Tapu Lele to hold into your hand for the next turn, and then just go from there. And now we've got Plumeria, and this is a pretty incredible disruption card. So don't let the requirement to discard 2 cards from your hand fool you. This is actually really, really powerful, even if you have to pay that every single time. And the reason why is because it's any energy from play. I don't think that, my memory, there's been a supporter that just does something like that so easily. Guaranteed. I can't remember something like that since like energy removal or super energy removal. So good card, definitely, even if you have no way to get around the payment effect. Although that said, there are lots of ways to get around it. In standard, of course, there's Starmie, which lets you discard a card to get 2 water back, so it becomes really simple. Just discard the 2 water you got back for Plumeria. I think that creates a ton of options for water decks for sure, and especially for disruption attrition water decks like Lapras and for Water Box and things like that. And expanded, it gets even better because you have access to Execute from Plasma Freeze, so you constantly bring back the Executes, discard energy with Plumeria over and over and over again. And to make matters worse, the Executes are really easy to get with Battle Compressors. So all things considered, this is an incredible card in every format. I don't know exactly what its best niche would be in Worlds, because there are lots of ways to deal with this card at Worlds. There are, I mean, Volcanion has energy acceleration anyways. There is Decidueye, which is going to shut stuff off to begin with and doesn't need energy to function as much. And to make matters worse, a lot of the Wobbuffet based decks from before Guardians Rising came out are just bad right now because of Garbodor. Even with Gardevoir maybe taking over a lot of the play that Garbodor got, I think that Gardevoir would be able to win Wobbuffet matchups pretty handily, but we'll see. At any rate, I think that some of this card's best potential in every format is going to be related to really painful disruption decks or mill decks. Now we've got Po Town, and that is not a very opaque pun there, Po Town, because it's like a sad, like dilapidated poor town. Po Town, it's Po. And you're dealing damage to your Pokemon when you evolve them. That's kind of a pain. So I mean, obvious idea right there is putting it in a basic deck, punishing your opponent for evolving. So by my count, I think most of the major decks right now are heavily evolution based. I mean, Decidueye is evolution based. Garbodor is. I would, however, say that another way you could go about this deck is, or excuse me, this card, is if you ran it with a Rage-like attacker that was an evolution Pokemon. So one idea, I mean, I'm trying to remember of a card with that specific type of attack that's an evolution Pokemon. There's the Charizard with genetic memory from Generations, the Radiant Collection one. That one could potentially do that, but I can't help but feel like I'm missing out on something really important here, but I'm sure somebody will remind me in the comments. And we got a new type of Pokefinder Rotom decks. And basically all this is a slightly higher range version of a single puzzle of time. That's not worth it. That's just bad. I think that if you were running that, maybe it would make more sense if you were running like one. But if you're running a lot of them, it would just be better to run puzzle of time. Then we got Sophocles. Discard 2, draw 4. I think this is going to be really helpful with Darkrai GX for sure. That's your way to get it and a Dark Energy into the discard pile pretty easily. Would you want to run these guys like over Sycamore? No way. I think maybe the better way to go about it is to run like 1 or 2. Probably not anymore, but just enough to the point where you're consistently searching it out with Wonder Tag, and it's not prized. We got Super Scoop Up. Card that's been out of rotation for only a pretty short period of time. It's back, and it'll be really helpful with a lot of different cards. I think the most interesting thing I can think of just immediately off the top of my head is with Force of Giant Plants Decidueye without Vileplume in the standard format going into Worlds. That actually sounds a lot better than, say, like De-Evolution Spray. And the cool thing about Super Scoop Up with that deck is you can get back Shaman. meaning that you can reuse Shaman. And if you're reusing Shaman, then that means you're getting access to more of your Feather Arrows more quickly. So theoretically, an engine with like 2 or 3 Shaman EX and 4 Super Scoop Up, that could be getting out 3 or even 4 Decidueye into play very easily on the first turn of the game. Now, is that going to make your Gardevoir matchup a lot worse? Yeah, but I think it's definitely something worth to consider. Also, for standard and expanded in general, Super Scoop Up and Shaman is an option just for turbo energizing any deck. I'd actually say that's part of the reason why Shiftry got banned, because it was so easy to get Shiftrys out into play thanks to cards like Super Scoop Up and Shaman. I would also say, though, that for the upcoming format, it can be okay, but I think there are probably better options. And the reason why I think that is because, let's just do the math here. So the issue that has always plagued this card has been space efficiency. So let's assume that we are getting normal luck on the coin flip, which is approximately like 50%. We assume that all of the randomization elements there are 100% guaranteed in terms of being reliable as randomizers. There's no like weighted chancy coins from base set or weird metal coins or anything like that. No, we're playing by the official rules, and the official rules have coins that are 50-50. And what we have here is we have essentially either 4 spots with the possibility of all 4 of them working, which is incredible, or we have 1 out of 16 games where you have 4 dead spots. That is a killer. And it's not nearly as much of a killer in a best 2 out of 3 big tournament, but it's not good at all in, say, a best of 1 situation, because the variance is a lot worse. Now, maybe on the flip side, the variance could help you a lot more, but all things considered, in my experience playing this card many years over many different formats, I think the situations where you're getting all tails are a lot worse than the situations with all heads are better. So when you're debating this card against, say, like AZ and Expanded, it's going to be a pretty easy decision. When you're debating this against Acerola, it's not going to be quite as easy a decision, but you'll have to use your judgment on what type of a deck you're running. So think about it. I mean, it's a good card, it's got lots of potential, but I don't think that it really rewards the type of consistent conservative play that you see at the top tables over and over again. And for that reason, I don't really know about its main potential here, because it's only been in a handful of extremely successful decks. Most of the time, even when it's been legal, it's been looked over by most people. And then we've got Tormenting Spray, which is a really neat item utility card, discarding a supporter and giving a... Well, scratch that, you don't get a peek at your opponent's hand. You get to choose it, and if it is a supporter, you discard it. I think that would be a lot better if you got a chance to look at your opponent's hand, but it would be a lot more broken too. Now, here's kind of a weird little thing, where if you are the player who is getting hit by a Tormenting Spray, you need to do something to be really careful to avoid getting abused by that card. And by abuse, I mean the text of the card says random, but if your opponent sees you eyeing a particular card in your hand, like, you know what, I've got a few extra cards over here. Let's go ahead and use them as an example. So I don't think I have any supporters here, but I've got these guys, and one of them is a basic energy. So I'm shuffling them up, and you already know this water energy. That's the basic energy. This is something that lots of players have done over the years. Against things like Absol, but I have shuffled these cards up, and when you're in my situation where if you're getting played by a Tormenting Spray, it is really important you do not look at the card that you want your opponent to discard. You don't want to make that type of eye contact, because the way that the randomization element is decided in real life is the person playing the card chooses a card to discard. It's the closest we can get to a random opportunity with it, short of like rolling a die or something like that. But at any rate, this is going to be the most practical way it's done because you're choosing the card at random. And here I am, I'm eyeing a card, and you know I'm making pretty good eye contact with it. It's my water energy or supporter. So I now have a dead hand because I made eye contact with the card I wanted. So what does that mean? I think it's important. I mean, I know this is kind of a weird nitty-gritty thing to be doing in a set review, but it's important to be thinking about that because people are going to run this card. It might only fit in niche situations, but if you're the person who's getting hit by this card, shuffle up your hand, and for all that is holy, do not look at the card you don't want discarded. And then that raises an interesting question about the person on the other end. Well, if you're basing your judgment based off of something your opponent is doing, is it really random anymore? Well, in that case, you might consider rolling a die to make your decision. I don't know if that's prohibited by the rules for any reason. It's been a long, long time since there's been a card that could be widely splashed like this one, but until further notice, I don't see why it would be a problem to roll a randomizer or something, as long as it didn't take up that much time. But that is one thing you could do just to assure that you're choosing a random card, because then it gets into a pretty gray area where, okay, I'm basing my decision off of what my opponent's looking at, then it's not random anymore. But you can make a wine in front of me argument that, well, I don't know what my opponent's doing. They could be looking at any card. They could be looking at a good card. They could be looking at a bad card. So, therefore, it's still random. So, I think that these randomization cards offer a lot of gray area and complication in the rules and especially in tournament play. But even in league play, I think it's a smart idea just to do things that preserve the random element and don't give your opponent an advantage. And we got a reprint of weakness policy. Don't feel like talking about that. We all know what it does. We got Wick, and I don't think this card is really that great. I mean, let's just break it down for a second. So, generally when we're playing draw power, we want to have better cards. We want to have more cards. And so generally when we're doing that, we're aiming for a net gain somehow. So for example, when you're playing Sycamore, you may be, you're probably on average discarding fewer cards than you are drawing. So what that is combined with actually playing the card is you're getting a net gain. So you discard a hand of 4, including Sycamore, you get a net gain of 3. The problem with Wick though is Wick is always giving you a net negative. You're getting fewer cards because you played Wick. That is not that good because you are getting yourself into a situation where you are losing draw power and all you're doing is you're refreshing every other card in your hand. At that point, you might as well be playing something else. Heck, it might even be better to play like Shauna or something because at least there's a potential to get more cards into your hand. And I think this could serve some sort of neat niche function when N gets rotated, if it ever gets rotated. Because at that point it would be the only way to disrupt your opponent's busted hand. But even then, if they've got a really big hand, then they're just going to get that same amount of cards and probably get what they need anyways. So I think that if anybody really wants to play this card, I think it's super, super overrated. We got Wishful Baton. So long story short, get knocked out by damage, move basic energies from your active Pokemon to your bench Pokemon. This unfortunately has some potential, but it's kind of stunted in how good it can really be. And the reason for that is because a lot of stuff runs special energy and a lot of stuff doesn't run a lot of energy to begin with. So its best places are probably more in turbo decks that rely on a lot of basic energy. So it could be good and could be pretty good actually in Volcanion. Could be pretty good in Darkrai. I mean, at this point, we've got what? We've got Experience Share legal, we've got Damage Addition effects like Choice Band legal, and we've got this legal. I think that can be pretty amazing in the right situation. It might make your Garbodor matchup arguably a little worse, but just don't play tools. I think that all in all, this is probably a lot better in the standard format than it would be in the expanded format. Although, maybe there's a home for it there too. And now we've got a whole bunch of expensive, pretty cards. I don't actually think that we have anything new here. Well, we've got Tapu Bulu GX living for a little while longer, although I can't imagine a situation where this set does not get rotated years into the future and the promo would. And you know what? I'm going to dot my I's and cross my T's just to make sure. We got lots of expensive cardboard here. Got a reprint a choice band, although same thing for that. That's not going to rotate. Reprint a multi-switch. And the coup de grace of all super expensive cards, Basic Energy. So congratulations, Darkrai players. You can now run Secret Rare Darkness Energy with Secret Rare Ultra Ball. And your deck can cost $1,000. So, thanks a lot for watching not only this part, but the last part too. You guys have a lot of patience. Same thing goes for this video. I've had everything tagged. So if you want to take a look at something in particular, feel free to do that. Don't bother looking through all the video if you don't want to. Thanks a lot.